Hello, this is the next chapter for the little people. So we're now on chapter 11. I asked a few questions about chapter 10. How did you get on with them? Okay, I hope. First question was what did Arrietty sit on at tea time? And the answer was she sits on a cotton reel. Because to her it would be the size of a stool. Next question was, what did they eat? And they ate sliced chestnuts and a potted shrimp. Sounds yummy, doesn't it? And then number 3, what did Arrietty write her letter on? So she's writing a letter to Uncle Henry. And she tears out a page of her diary and writes the letter on there. And she puts it underneath, she puts it inside a book to keep it safe. Okay, so last time, after going borrowing with Pod and talking with the boy, he doesn't know about it, Homily doesn't know about it, she's keeping it secret. She knows they'll be really cross. After Arrietty has had tea, she goes and writes the letter. And then when she's written it, she's got to find a way of getting it underneath the mat of the front door. Okay, so this is chapter 11. Okay. But it was one thing to write a letter, and quite another to find some means of getting it under the mat. Pod, for several days, could not be persuaded to go borrowing. He was well away on his yearly turn out of the storerooms, mending partitions and putting up new shelves. Arrietty usually enjoyed this spring sorting, when half-forgotten treasures came to light and new uses were discovered for old borrowings. She used to love turning over the scraps of silk or lace, the odd kid gloves, the pencil stubs, the rusty razor blades, the hairpins and the needles, the dried figs, the hazelnuts, the powdery bits of chocolate, and the scarlet stubs of sealing wax. Pod, one year, had made her a hairbrush from a toothbrush, and Homily had made her a small pair of Turkish bloomers from 2 glove fingers for knocking about in the mornings. There were reels and reels of coloured silks and cottons and small variegated balls of odd wool, pen nibs which Homily used as flower scoops, and bottle tops galore. But this year Arrietty banged about impatiently and stole away whenever she dared to stare through the grating, hoping to see the boy. She now kept the letter always with her, stuffed inside her jersey, and the edges became rubbed. Once he did run past the grating, and she saw his woolen stockings. He was making a chugging noise in his throat, like some kind of engine, and as he turned the corner he let out a piercing woo-woo. It was a train whistle, he told her afterwards. So he did not hear her call. One evening after dark, she crept away and tried to open the first gate, but swing and tug as she might, she could not budge the pin. Homily, every time she swept the sitting room, would grumble about the carpet. It may be a curtain and chair job, she'd say to Pod, but it wouldn't take you not a quarter of an hour with your pin and name take to fetch me a bit of blotting paper from the desk in the morning room. Anyone would think, looking at this floor, that we lived in a toad hole. No one could call me house-proud, Homily. You couldn't be, not with my kind of family. But I do like, she said, to keep nice things nice. And at last, on the 4th day, Pod gave in. He laid down his hammer, a small electric bell clapper, and said to Arrietty, "Come along." Arrietty was glad to see the morning room. The door, luckily, had been left ajar, and it was fascinating to stand at last in the thick pile of the carpet, gazing upwards at the shelves and pillars and towering gables of the famous overmantel. So that's where they lived, she thought, those pleasure-loving creatures, remote and gay and self-sufficient. She imagined the overmantel women, little Tweedy, Homily had described them, with wasp waists and piled Edwardian hair, swinging carelessly outwards on the pilasters, lissom and laughing, gazing at themselves in the insect looking-glass, which reflected back to the tobacco jars, the cut glass decanters, the bookshelves, and the plush-covered table. She imagined the overmantel men, fair, they were said to be, with long moustaches and nervous, slender hands, smoking and drinking and telling their witty tales. So they had never asked Homily up there. Poor Homily, with her bony nose and never tidy hair. They would have looked at her strangely, Arrietty thought, with their long, half-laughing eyes, and smile a little, and, humming, turn away. And they'd lived only on breakfast food, on toast and egg and tiny snips of mushroom. Sausage they'd have had, and crispy bacon, and little sips of tea and coffee. Where were they now? Arrietty wondered. Where could such creatures go? Pod had flung his pin so it stuck into the seat of the chair, and was up the leg in a trice, leaning outwards on his tape. Then, pulling out the pin, he flung it like a javelin above his head into a fold of the curtain. This is the moment, Arrietty thought, and felt for her precious letter. She slipped into the hall. It was darker this time, with the front door closed, and she ran across it with a beating heart. The mat was heavy, but she lifted up the corner and slid the letter under by pushing with her foot. There, she said, and looked about her. Shadows, shadows, and the ticking clock. She looked across the great plain of floor to where, in the distance, the stairs mounted. Another world above, she thought. World on world, and shivered slightly. Arrietty, called Pod softly from the morning room, and she ran back in time to see him swing clear of the chair seat and pull himself upwards on the name tape, level with the desk. Lightly he came down feet apart, and she saw him, for safety's sake, twist the name tape lightly round his wrist. I wanted you to see that, he said, a little breathless. The blotting paper, when he pushed it, floated down, quite softly, riding lightly on the air, and lay at last some feet beyond the desk, pink and fresh on the carpet's dingy pile. You start rolling, whispered Pod. I'll be down. And Arrietty went on her knees and began to roll the blotting paper until it grew too stiff for her to hold. Pod soon finished it off and lashed it with his name tape, through which he ran his hat pin, and together they carried the long cylinder, as two house painters would carry a ladder, under the clock and down the hole. Homily hardly thanked them when, panting a little, they dropped the bundle in the passage outside the sitting-room door. She looked alarmed. Oh, there you are, she said. Thank goodness. That boy's about again. I've just heard Mrs. Driver talking to Crampville. Oh, cried Arrietty. What did she say? And Homily glanced sharply at her and saw that she looked pale. Arrietty realised she should have said, What boy? But it was too late now. Nothing really bad, Homily went on, as though to reassure her. It's just a boy they have upstairs. It's nothing at all, but I heard Mrs. Driver say that she'd take a slipper to him, see if she wouldn't, if he had the mats up once again in the hall. The mats up in the hall? Echoed Arrietty. Yes, 3 days running, she said to Crampville, he's had the mats up in the hall. She could tell, she said, by the dust and the way he'd put them back. It was the hall part that worried me, seeing as you and your father... Well, what's the matter, Arrietty? There's no call for that sort of face. Come on now, help me move the furniture and we'll get down the carpet. Oh dear, thought Arrietty miserably as she helped her mother empty the matchbox chest of drawers. 3 days running he's looked and nothing there. He'll give up hope now. He'll never look again. That evening she stood for hours on a stool under the chute in their kitchen, pretending she was practising to get a feeling, when really she was listening to Mrs. Driver's conversation with Crampville. All she learned was that Mrs. Driver's feet were killing her, and that it was a pity that she hadn't given in her notice last May, and would Crampville have another drop, considering there was more in the cellar than anyone would drink in her lifetime. And if they thought she was going to clean the first floor window single-handed, they'd better think again. But on the third night, just as Arrietty had climbed down off the stool before she overbalanced with weariness, she heard Crampville say, "If you ask me, I'd say he had a ferret." And quickly Arrietty climbed back again, holding her breath. "A ferret?" she heard Mrs. Driver exclaim shrilly. "Whatever next? Where would he keep it?" "Well, that I wouldn't like to say," said Crampville in his rumbling earth voice. "All I know is he was up beyond Parkin's Beck, going round all the banks and calling like down all the rabbit holes." "Well, I never," said Mrs. Driver. "Where's your glass?" "Just a drop," said Crampville. "That's enough. Goes to your liver, this sweet stuff. Not like beer, it isn't." "Yes," he went on. "When he saw me coming with a gun, he pretended to be cutting a stick like from the hedge. But I'd seen him all right, and heard him, calling away, his nose down a rabbit hole. It's my belief he's got a ferret." There was a gulp, as though Crampville was drinking. "Yes," he said at last, and Arrietty heard him set down a glass. "A ferret called Uncle something." Arrietty made a sharp movement, balanced for one moment with arms waving, and then fell off the stool. There was a clatter as the stool slid sideways, banged against the chest of drawers, and rolled over. "What was that?" asked Crampville. There was silence upstairs, and Arrietty held her breath. "I didn't hear nothing," said Mrs. Driver. "Yes," said Crampville, "it was under the floor like, there by the stove." "Oh, that's nothing," said Mrs. Driver. "It's the coals falling. Often sounds like that. Scares you sometimes when you're sitting here alone. Here, pass your glass. There's only a drop left. Might as well finish the bottle." "Yes," went on Crampville, returning to his story. "And when I come up with me gun, he says all innocent like to put me off, I shouldn't wonder. Any old badger sets round here?" "Artful," said Mrs. Driver. "The things they think of. Badgers' sets," and she gave her creaking laugh. "As a matter of fact," said Crampville, "there did used to be one, but when I showed him where it was, like he didn't take no notice of it, just stood there, waiting for me to go." Crampville laughed. "Two can play at that game," I thought, so I just sits myself down. And there we were, the two of us." "And what happened?" "Well, he had to go off in the end, leaving his ferret. I waited a bit, but it never came out. I poked around a bit and whistled. Pity I never heard properly what he called it. Uncle something, it sounded like." Arrietty heard the sudden scrape of a chair. "Well," said Crampville, "I'd better get on now and shut up the chickens." The scullery door banged, and there was a sudden clatter overhead as Mrs. Driver began to rake the stove. Arrietty replaced the stool and stole softly into the sitting room, where she found her mother alone. It was a close one, wasn't it? Mrs. Driver and Crampville nearly heard Arrietty under the floor, didn't they? So, looks like the boy's been up to the badger set. Maybe he's delivered the letter. We'll have to see, won't we? Questions for this week. When they go borrowing, what does Pod climb up? First question. Okay. Second question. What did Pod push down to Arrietty from the desk? So he pushes something down and it floats down. And Arrietty goes to get it. And then question 3. Why was Mrs. Driver cross with the boy? Okay. Hope you get on all right with them. And hopefully you enjoyed that. And maybe I'll see you next time. Bye for now.